Hi. Thanks for coming to talk about the apocalypse with us on a Saturday, on a beautiful Saturday evening.
Hashtag climate change.
Hashtag climate crisis.
Ooh.
Or climate emergency, climate breakdown. What's the new hashtag?
That's a long hashtag.
I don't know.
Hashtag fix it.
Yeah, let's go with that.
So I'm really excited to introduce our guests. I'm going to give sort of long intros because I want you to know, like, in some amount of nuance, how incredible these two humans are. So first, Rhiana Gunn-Wright is Policy Director of New Consensus, which is the think tank developing the Green New Deal. Apparently, there are some fans of that policy resolution. Previously, she was policy director for Abdul El-Sayed's 2018 gubernatorial campaign. She has also worked on policy for the Detroit Health Department, the Institute for Women's Policy Research, and for former First Lady Michelle Obama. She was a Rhodes Scholar, and if you don't know now, you know her GIF.
I only say GIF. I refuse to say GIF.
She's very good at whatever those are, and you should all be following her on Twitter. And then we have Dr. Kate Marvel, who is a climate scientist at NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies and Columbia University. I should really be like assuming there will be applause and pause like preemptively. I'm like, her research focuses on how human activities affect the climate using satellite observations, computer models, and basic physics to study the human impact on variables from rainfall patterns to cloud cover. Fun fact about Kate, Earth is her favorite planet. So if for no other reason, let's like keep it habitable. So I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for being here. Don't move back too far. There was like a lot of work that went into this lighting. So I think I just got a thumbs up from the team in the back. They're like, yes, don't let them move the seats.
Sorry.
When and how did trying to prevent the apocalypse become your day job?
I'm Black, which apocalypse?
This is a great question. This is, in fact, the question. People are like, why is equity part of the Green New Deal? We don't understand why that's important. We're going to get into that later. I would say specifically the climate change apocalypse.
Okay. Well, I'll go because I haven't been here very long on Earth and in the climate work. So I got into climate from an environmental justice perspective. So my background is in social policy. I mostly have worked on policy related to poverty. And I was the policy analyst at the Detroit Health Department, and Abdul El-Sayed was my boss, and he was actually really committed to environmental justice and the public health impacts. And Detroit is a city that is really ravaged by environmental justice issues. There used to be an incinerator in the middle of the city that burned trash, 80% of which was from neighboring suburbs with a way higher median income. There's an oil refinery in Detroit on the southwest side. And so one of my first projects was actually to secretly figure out a plan to shut down the incinerator. And I stole a lot of contracts. And so that's when I really started to see those issues as connected, because before I was working on like higher ed, I was working with single parents, and it was like, all I ever knew really about environment was like solar panels. And I was like, I don't understand how I'm supposed to tell this woman who's like really struggling with childcare that like she should get solar panels. Like why? I don't even, what about her property taxes? I have a lot of questions. But then I started to see the connections, and then I really dove deep. We ran the Abdul campaign, we didn't win, spoiler alert, I don't know. And so New Consensus actually called me up, and the way that they tried to get me was like, would you do for America what you did for Michigan? And I was like, if you pay me enough. And then the project was a Green New Deal, and I dove in, and since then I have actually become passionate about climate on a level that I didn't know, because before, environment really seemed to me like honestly a really white issue. I was like, I don't understand how these things are connected, but really starting to understand the intersections and recognizing that climate is the byproduct of the ways that we ingest energy, and the systems that we have are essentially the body that we have created. And so how do you switch the fuel system for your body, right? If you were to stop eating food, what would that mean, right? If you stop using fossil fuels, what does that mean, and how do you do that, and how do you do that in a way that protects people? So that's how I ended up here now, and I do care. I say words like carbon footprint now. What the fuck is that? And my husband is like, I'm talking to him about getting an electric car. He's not super pumped, but we're trying. He's from Georgia. All he knows is pickup trucks, so it's fine. And so I feel, honestly, before this, I feel still like a bit of an imposter in this space because I haven't been here very long, but I also think that, like, if we're gonna solve this, we have to have people not like me, but people who have not been here forever, who are allowed to speak and engage. And
Absolutely.
And so, yeah.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, you're welcome.
Bringing your brain to this crazy problem. Kate, how did you end up working on the climate crisis at least 40 hours a week?
So I came into it through being a nerd. I did my PhD in cosmology, which is like basically like the thing Stephen Hawking did. I did my PhD in the same building as Stephen Hawking.
What?
So you would like give a talk, and then like Stephen Hawking would be there, and you're like, this is awkward. The thing.
Did he give you any like good feedback ever on your talk?
So real talk, it takes him a long time. It took him a long time to say things.
Yeah.
And so, you'd be waiting for feedback for like 20 minutes, and then it'd be like, I need to go to the bathroom. And you're like, well, God damn it.
He wasn't like, great job?
No.
Like, cool science?
No.
He was just like, I have other needs besides
that's
your
fair.
talk.
That's fair, But in the course of doing this PhD, I was doing a lot of like string theory, a lot of like, okay, like how do we build a model of the entire universe? And a lot of me felt like this is kind of made up, because a lot of it would be like, what if there were 11 dimensions and some of them were really small and some were really big? And there was never any way to get any experimental evidence for it. It was like, what if we had an accelerator the size of literally the universe? Then maybe we could figure this out, but like we don't. And so in the course of doing this PhD, I guess like, I was studying the entire universe, and I realized that most of the universe sucks. Like this is the only good planet.
Oh, I see where you're going with this. I was like, no other galaxies are like, they look pretty to me.
I mean, they're fine, but like all of my friends live here, And like,
there's no exposed brick in other galaxies.
No, there is no whiskey anywhere else in the universe. Like, this is the only planet with whiskey. And so, I kind of realized, like, I still want to do physics. I still want to do science, but I want to do something that feels tangible and that's testable and that's connected to the real world. And I also want to do something that matters to people, that people care about. So I kind of came into this work from left field, from basically being a nerd and wanting to find something interesting to learn about.
Prove to us how nerdy you are by explaining your necklace.
Oh my God, okay. So this is the Apollo 11 trajectory. It is literally a moonshot. I felt like it would be appropriate for tonight,
Because that's how big a problem we have to solve.
Right.
Okay, so I couldn't miss the chance having these two experts here, especially a climate scientist, to make sure that no one leaves this building without being able to just like take down any deniers that cross your path. So Kate's gonna give us like the 3-minute 101 on like it's real and it's us, and I have the graphs to prove it. So do you have the
All right,
clicker?
do I have the graphs?
Yeah.
We'll see. All right.
Before we do that, can I say something really? So you all are going to see me look shocked a lot. It is because I went to a STEM high school, and I was like one of 15 kids. I was like, science forever? No. And didn't go into science, but I still love scientists. So I'm like in awe of Kate.
Well,
I was like, the
I'm in
cool
awe
kids
of
in my
you,
school did
so-
like calc-based physics, and I did not. And they were like, oh, you are but a plebeian. And I was like, whatever.
There's a lot of nerd crushes happening on
Right.
this
I know,
stage
so
right
I-
now.
so
you're
you're
just
just-
like watching a love fest. Like
So you're just
welcome
gonna
to
see
the
me-
conversation we've always wanted to have.
Yeah, so you're just gonna see me, just so no one's alarmed, you're gonna see me do this a lot when Kate talks. What?
And loving gazing. Okay,
All right,
let's
so,
go. Let's do this.
Just to prove like how much, okay, it actually works. Oh my God. Okay, so what I'm going to show you here is the observed global average temperature from 1850 up until the present day. So this is collected, I know, right? It's not good. This is data collected by NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies, where I work right now. If I showed you the data set collected by any other reputable group in the world, it would look exactly the same thing. So there is absolutely no doubt whatsoever that global average temperatures are increasing. We've warmed about 1 degree Celsius already since
Can we
pre-industrial.
Fahrenheit that for folks?
Oh my God.
Two?
Someone
Two.
Google
little
it.
little
Google
less
it.
than 2.
Dr.
Little less than 2.
Gavin Schmidt says 2
All right. Oh yeah. My boss is literally here.
in the front
so
row. He was like 2. It's 2.
2 degrees Fahrenheit? Thank
Yeah.
you.
I just want to point out when we talk later about 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees Celsius, those are Celsius. Those limits that we're talking about are Celsius. So anyway, bad. But a lot of people like to tell climate scientists, like, oh, don't you know climate's always changed? And we're like, yeah, we know, we figured that out. Like, we told you that. And so it's true. Like, we know that there are other things that can affect the climate. So in particular, the ice ages that happened ages ago. Those we think were caused by little natural wobbles in the Earth's orbit. If the sun were to get a lot hotter, that would warm up the planet. But guys, like, I work at NASA. If the sun got a lot hotter, we wouldn't notice. Sometimes you hear, is it volcanoes? And volcanoes is an interesting thing because volcanoes actually can really affect the climate. In, I think, 1805, Mount Tambora blew up in Indonesia and just spread so much gas and dust all throughout the atmosphere that it actually made the Earth much, much, much colder. And that was called the year without a summer. And during that year, Mary Shelley got trapped indoors with a bunch of insufferable men and wrote Frankenstein.
Relatable.
Relatable. So
Which is for sale in the back afterwards if you'd like to understand what that looks like.
We can ask, what is the effect of orbital changes on the Earth's temperature? What's the effect of fluctuations in the sun's output on global temperature? What's the effect of volcanoes? They just don't add up. Volcanoes have really big cooling effects, but those are really localized in time. And solar variations and orbital variations don't do anything at all. So this isn't enough to explain the warming that we've seen so far. So what about greenhouse gases? We have been emitting greenhouse gases because carbon dioxide is the inevitable product of combustion. You use a fossil fuel, the process by which you get energy from that fossil fuel puts carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's just a natural byproduct of that reaction. So what you can see is carbon dioxide for the past 800,000 years, and then carbon dioxide levels now, which really, I think, helps to put it in context.
And we're even higher since then. Are we at like 4, 10, or 11 now?
Yeah, we should probably do something about that.
We should make a plan or a deal or something.
We're working
let's
on
make
it.
a deal.
Yeah, let's make a deal.
We're working on it.
But that's not the only thing humans do to the climate. Humans change the way we use the land, and particularly we cut down a lot of forests and we replace them with grasslands or pastures or croplands. We also deplete ozone, and we also emit what scientists call aerosols, which is basically schmutz, gas and dust that you put in the upper atmosphere that blocks the sun and basically makes it a little bit colder. So if you look at what land use does, it's got a very, very, very slight cooling effect. If you look at what ozone does, on a global level, not that much. Aerosols actually have a fairly substantial cooling effect, and greenhouse gases make it a lot warmer. So if you put all of those things together, you get a temperature graph that looks something like this. So this is not the only reason we know that human beings are causing this warming. There's a whole bunch of different lines of evidence. But this, I think, is a really clear illustration. And we worked with Bloomberg News to do this, so I want to give them credit for it.
Everyone's clear, right? It's us, and we should do something about it. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Marvel. That was amazing. The 201, I would say. So one thing before we move away from this section, climate change versus global warming. Break that down for us. And Rhiana, you may know a bit about the context for why those terms shifted as well, but why did we go from global warming to climate change? Which are we supposed to use? Are they the same?
I will defer to Rhiana on the politics of that. For me, global warming refers to a rise in the average temperature of the planet, which is about 59 degrees Fahrenheit right now, which seems fine, right? And the number one question that I get when I talk about climate change is when people hear about global warming, they're like, who cares? And I actually think that's a fair question because nobody experiences the average temperature of the planet. What we actually experience is the knock-on effects, is the changes to things that we care about, things like heat waves, things like hurricanes, things like rainfall patterns, and all of those things are changing. And basically the climate that we've predicated our entire civilization on is changing underneath us. So that's why I say climate change as opposed to global warming, because I don't really care about global warming. I care about the things that it does. And climate change for me is a good term for that, but I'm curious to hear sort of what the politics of those are.
Yeah, so I can't say I have done a historical study of it. From what I know from folks who do climate communications, the reason that they switched was basically what you said, was global warming focused people on warming, and it also, which meant that when it wasn't warm, right, if you had a snowstorm or a polar vortex like we just had this past winter, I actually lived in Detroit, and it was negative 30 with wind chill while I was there. And then the next week, it was 50. It was terrifying. But because warming focuses you on warming, when there's blizzards and things, people don't connect it to climate change because it's not getting warmer. And that's how part of the reason you have, it's not the whole reason, obviously, that you have senators walking in with or reps with balls of snowballs being is it real? No. And you're actually, that's
I can't believe that happened.
multiple times. You should feel bad that it happened multiple times. And so it was focusing people on one thing and ignoring the rest. And so I think the move to climate change, or now climate crisis, which is supposed to denote a new level of urgency, is about widening the field so that people connect not just warming, but droughts, but polar vortexes, flooding, right, to climate change. And so it's not quite
I've
as
actually
narrow.
heard a different story.
Yeah.
We should all Google this later, but I heard there was actually a conservative focus group that was people are starting to get concerned about global warming. We should, is there something else we could call it that they would, worry about it less? Did anyone else see the movie Vice?
Yes.
I don't know how accurate that movie is, but that's where I saw that, and I was like, this makes perfect sense. But they're like, what if we called it climate change? And they're like, that sounds fine, not so scary.
Yeah, maybe.
So I wonder if
know.
there's some truth to all of these different threads. I certainly use the two of them, as Kate mentions. Can we have Rhiana move back just a little bit so I can see Kate? while we're all talking? Am I going to get in trouble? Okay, we're good. You can scooch back a little bit. No, back.
Is this better?
This is
I'm moving
amazing.
very slowly.
That's perfect. Okay, so will you pass me this clicker?
Clicker?
Oh, there's this too. Sorry, we forgot about your last slide.
Oh, do you want me to talk about it?
Yeah, just give us what is this?
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
So the little yellow spaghettis are the output of climate models. And the blue is the observed temperature that I showed you ad nauseum to get you really worried. And just to get you more worried, these are the projections of climate models as you go forward into the 21st century. And I want to put this in context for you. So there's a lot of uncertainty here. And sometimes you hear people using uncertainty as kind of a motivation to not do anything. Because when normal people hear things are uncertain, they think, well, it could be really bad, but it could also be fine. And so what this graph is showing is that we've ruled out fine. It's not going to be fine. So under kind of a business as usual emissions scenario, what you can see is all of the models are projecting that it's going to get warmer. But some of them have it warming by, about 3 degrees Celsius, and some almost 6 degrees. And I want to put that in context for you.
So we're talking like double digits Fahrenheit.
Yeah. But for me, the most useful context is 4.5 degrees Celsius is the difference between now and the last ice age. So these are really, really, really seismic things we're talking about here.
And we're talking 2100, so like people now will still be alive then.
Yeah, my kid's going to be alive, hopefully.
Godspeed to him.
Yeah.
So we have to do something about this, right? So along comes this idea of the Green New Deal. How many of you have actually read the Green New Deal resolution?
Oh my
This is pretty good. Okay, so I have it here if you want to borrow it later. It's all over the internet. It's 14 pages in like very large font and double spaced. So 10 minutes max. And it's worth it. It's like a little bit of poetry in there. So I first became aware of this.
I didn't write it.
I first became aware of it when I saw this photograph of Representative Ocasio-Cortez in Pelosi's office with Sunrise Movement activists, which was an amazing moment. Tell us, Rhiana, what does this photo mean to you?
So that is the day my entire life changed on a personal level. So this photo to me is what happens when people literally have no choice but to save their own lives. So Sunrise, I think, how many of you have heard of Sunrise Movement? Okay, yeah, so Sunrise Movement is a really dope climate organization that is really spearheading the movement for a Green New Deal. And Representative Ocasio-Cortez ran on a Green New Deal. It was part of one of the things she ran on for her congressional campaign, and she defined it as a World War II style mobilization to tackle climate change and income inequality. And so in the background of this, so Sunrise was planning to do this protest on green jobs, and they were also asking, like, is this big enough? What else should we ask for? And New Consensus had been working with...
New Consensus is the think tank where she's the policy director, just so we're all clear on that.
Yeah, so we were working on a Green New Deal project and happened to hook up with Sunrise through like various connections and be like, maybe you should ask for a Green New Deal. And they were like, yeah, this sounds great. And they did their research and decided that's what they wanted to do. So they had this protest where they sat in Nancy Pelosi's office the week that new reps were being inaugurated, or like, sworn in, doing their like thing. It's basically orientation for high school, but for congresspeople. And they did the sit-in, and Representative Ocasio-Cortez came, and it blew up. So to put it in context, the Green New Deal was something we were working on. I was actually hired to do a 4-month contract, right? To just do a deep dive, to be like, here's how you start.
And remotely, like from Detroit.
Yeah, I was still in Detroit.
But she moved to DC last week, so there's an all-in scenario that's now happening.
Yeah. And so I was in Detroit, so we were working on it to give them, you know, the backing that they needed to know how to start whatever legislation. This protest happened. My boss was actually there. And then I'm like reading about the Green New Deal on the news. And so the resolution that you see is actually the second version. The first version was asking for a select committee that would literally just plan out a Green New Deal. And that didn't go through, although there's now a select committee on climate change in the Senate. And then the Green New Deal took off. They decided to do a marker resolution, which is the resolution that Ayana held up to lay out the like goals and principles and projects of a Green New Deal. And then it sort of blew up. But this is literally, Sunrise is a youth movement, which means that when you have youth having to do this, it means that something went wrong. I'm serious. These are high school kids. My boss was there actually doing an economics teach-in. They were staying in a church. They came from all over the country to stay in a church to do a sit-in. We're talking about some like students who are in high school. This is because they literally were like, this is happening. No one is talking about it. We are the ones who are going to have to live with this world come 2100 when it's 4 degrees or whatever. 4, 6, 3, I don't know. Bad when it's bad. And here's a freshman congresswoman who was the only one brave enough to come and do this before she even started. So this is what this movement, what the movement is sort of, part of it is encapsulated in that photo.
So this is the header of this resolution, which starts recognizing the duty of the federal government to create a Green New Deal. And I love a good whereas preamble. This one's super solid. So I think, Rhiana, it's like you've never read this before.
Brand new.
So Rhiana, tell us, I think the thing that sticks out on this to me, they're both just staring at this thing, I don't know. These people want to see your face.
Oh, hello.
So the thing that sticks out for me here is how many co-sponsors there are. Because it's always portrayed as like, it's AOC's thing, but there's like 50 or something.
There's more, there's like 90.
There's
now.
90 co-sponsors.
It's been endorsed by all of the major Democratic presidential candidates in the Senate, although Amy Klobuchar is like, you know.
So has the
on it, she's like, maybe.
Has the Democratic Party thrown its weight behind this at all?
I mean, yes, yes and no, right? There's lots of the Dem Party that is excited about it and working on it. There are lots that say that putting equity and environment together is a mistake. And then there are others that are just like, ha, 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 we will do this better with adults in the room. So, you know, it's like a three-way split. Yeah. But I think there is uniting around the fact that we need a climate policy. Yeah. That is the uniting force now. Whether the Green New Deal is the one for you.
And
really
do you
differs.
feel like the Green New Deal is what instigated that, like,
Hell
we're
yeah.
going to do something now?
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
What?
Yes.
It's not like we didn't know climate change was happening before. You know, like, yes, it was. And it was, as much as people like to talk about, like, oh, it has to be bipartisan and through the halls of power. The reason that people are now saying we need climate legislation is because they're afraid. They're afraid of getting primaried. They're afraid of Sunrise and other groups sitting in their offices. They're afraid of getting a video out on the internet of them, you know, clashing with children. They're afraid of what could happen, and they're afraid of being laggards, right? And so I know that we all like to, well, you know, certain people like to live in a world where it doesn't have to be a fight to get to where we need to go. But the reason that it is turning around is because people see a fight happening and they see a fight forming. and everybody ain't meant to be a boxer, so
Truth.
they don't want that smoke.
So this resolution starts by talking about the science.
Yes.
So it starts by saying, like, we've had this Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change from the UN report in October. We've had the US National Climate Assessment Report in November of last year, released on Black Friday in the hopes that no one would read it, but, like, we read it. Sorry. And goes through, like, the first 2 pages are all of the key scientific findings. So I guess, Kate, I would turn this back to you and say, what role are you hoping that science plays in, this is just a resolution, right? So the policy, the regulations have to be developed to design how this is implemented. How do you hope that science is going to help guide or inform this process?
I'm kind of in 2 minds about this because I definitely think science needs to inform policymaking. And scientists, we are here. We want to work with policymakers, and I really want it to be a 2-way dialogue. I think to get started, that number 1, human activity is the dominant cause of observed climate change over the past century. That's what you need to know. And you need to know that the primary cause of that is greenhouse gases. And the way to stop climate change is to either take those greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere or not put them there. I think there's so much that you can do knowing only that basic. And that's a basic that we've known for a really, really long time. But at the same time, I think there is a lot of question of how do we adapt to what is coming? Because we cannot stop climate change. It's already here. So, the question of how do we use science to really anticipate what's coming? I think we can play a role there. But I think it really needs to be a 2-way dialogue. And I'm going to prove that by shutting up.
So perhaps my favorite whereas in this is, whereas the United States has historically been responsible for a disproportionate amount of greenhouse gas emissions, having emitted 20% of global greenhouse gas emissions through 2014, and has a high technological capacity, the United States must take a leading role in reducing emissions through economic transformation. So that was the first part I read of this. I was like, whoa, this is gonna be like a much more exciting few pages than I thought. Like, we're actually gonna take responsibility for what we've done. Interesting. So, Rhiana, that's one of my favorite parts. Do you have like a favorite part of the Green New Deal resolution you wanna share with us?
I didn't write this. People get it confused. I did not write this. This is all the work of the AOC and Markey staff, who, there's some real fire lines in here, but let me see. I'm trying to remember what page, if it's in the beginning or not. But well, I'll read you one of my favorite parts. So
You didn't know this was going to be a Green New Deal resolution book club, did you?
Yes. So, whereas climate change, pollution, and environmental destruction have exacerbated systemic, racial, regional, social, environmental, and economic injustices referred to in this preamble as systemic injustices by disproportionately affecting indigenous peoples, communities of color, migrant communities, deindustrialized communities, depopulated rural communities, the poor, low-income workers, women, the elderly, the unhoused, people with disabilities, and youth, referred to in this preamble as frontline vulnerable communities. And then there's lots of other parts.
So when I read that, I was like, oh, they are not messing around.
We don't play games.
We actually might do this in a way that doesn't screw people over.
Yeah, and then this is one, this is like a dream. I'm a nerd. I wanted to write policy since I was 19, and seeing the words systemic injustice in a piece of legislation moves me on like a deep level. But this is the other one. I'll just read this. Whereas the federal government-led mobilizations during World War II and the New Deal created the greatest middle class that the United States has ever seen, but many members of frontline and vulnerable communities were excluded from many of the economic and societal benefits of those mobilizations. And whereas the House of Representatives recognizes that a new national, social, industrial, and economic mobilization on a scale not seen since World War II and the New Deal is a historic opportunity, and then there's a couple, but this is my favorite, to counteract systemic injustices.
So this is your favorite part. It's also the most controversial part.
Yes.
People are like, why do you have to care about other humans and equity in the process of reforming our entire country to deal with this crisis? So tell us a little bit about like how that conversation is going down around the systemic injustices piece. And then Kate, I would love to hear from you, kind of how is the scientific community reacting to this proposal and framework?
Well, the conversation has been more difficult than I anticipated. I think that's partially because of my background. I've mostly worked in social policy where there's an understanding that different systems connect up to what you see. And I think climate and environmental movement is different from that for lots of reasons. I think one is the scientific, the sort of like real appeal to hard sciences, which is awesome. But in some cases, I think we have to be honest that like climate deniers have sometimes weaponized science to like push the evidentiary threshold so high that like people feel like they can't talk about climate change unless they have X background, right? Or unless they can know what ppms are, right? Unless they understand Celsius. And
Parts per million, by the way.
Yes, right. And that's not the fault of the scientists, right? It's the fault of people using science to do not so great things. And so there's that sort of tension. And so whereas I thought it would be sort of like, oh, here's some climate legislation, I care about that. If I have to have a side of universal health care, whatever, it's cool. And it was much more like, let me talk to your manager. And I was like, damn.
So why healthcare? I mean, that kind of caught me off guard at first. And
Yeah.
then I read some examples and I was like, oh, of course you would need healthcare to be able to make this process work.
So people like to talk about the Green New Deal as a progressive wish list, but it ignores the fact that the Green New Deal is a policy that's one based in industrial policy, right? How do you invest in industry? How do you rebuild the economy? How do you invest in like the makers and the economy to turn this around, right? And in the context of an economic mobilization like World War II, like the New Deal, people like to talk a lot about how you pay for it, but you actually pay for it in two ways. You pay for it in money and you pay for it in real resources. So workers, capital, et cetera. And the money part is actually the easier part. There's enough capital in the world. The government makes money, right, which is something we don't love to talk about, but the basic part there is that there's a lot of ways to crack that nut in terms of money. The people part is more difficult, and if you are not only going to protect people during economic transition, but allow them to participate, you need things that allow your workforce to not only be, and not your workforce, your entire population to be both educated, mobile, and healthy, or all three. And right now, our systems are not only set up not to do that, but they can actively hamper a transformation so that the people who are benefiting are the people who always benefit. So for instance, with healthcare, you have the issue of, I think a lot about people who are sort of on the margins of Medicaid, right? And so you're gonna have all these good jobs opening up, right? If you do a Green New Deal, you're gonna be investing. There's projection from like Rocky Mountain Institute that if you just deeply decarbonize the US, you would grow the economy 2.5 times, right? Because there's that much work to be done. A lot of those would likely, you hope they would be small businesses, which means that small businesses, if you have fewer than 50 employers, you're not required to provide healthcare. So you're gonna be asking a lot of people to move to employers that likely don't provide healthcare, right? If you are on Medicaid, so Medicaid gets a bad rap because of the network. I'm sorry, is this too nerdy? I can stop.
That is literally what we're all here for on a Saturday night.
Most people are like, just get to the point. But it's hard to get to the point. You have to know all this stuff. And so you have people going into these jobs. Medicaid gets a lot of a bad rep because there's limited network size, but it's actually incredibly comprehensive insurance. It's some of the most comprehensive insurance you can have. They cover long-term care, they cover chronic care, et cetera. If you have a chronic health condition and you're on Medicaid, if you take a higher job and your employer doesn't have health insurance, you're likely out of health insurance. Right? Like to have the sort of health insurance you have to deal with a chronic condition, you have to have good health insurance. That is expensive. If your employer isn't doing it, you have to go on the market. If your employer is providing health care, especially if they're a small business, it's probably high deductible, which means that you probably can't access it anyway.
So I can't like move to take a job in a solar factory because I'll lose my health care. And so we have this problem where people can't actually participate in this transformation of the economy because they like can't afford to take that leap.
Yeah, and even if you do not have a chronic condition, most health insurance is employer-based, right? So you might not even just want to move from your employer because that means you will lose your health insurance. So like an economist we work with a lot, he actually tweeted about how he's 30 and he's lost his employer and sponsor health insurance 5 times in his life. Right? Those are gaps. And so who's going to move across the country if they don't know if they have health insurance? It doesn't matter when you're younger, but when you're older, you have kids, it's different. Right? And so those are the sort of...
So the mobility piece is the one that like it took me a while to get my head around. Like we need people to be able to move around to like get all this stuff done that we need to do.
Yeah, I mean in World War II, you had huge mobilization swing, like patterns, and the kind of work that you would do in a green transition where you're like siting solar, doing transmission, that's all place-based work. People are going to have to move for a lot of it. Those jobs will be mobile. So there's no reason to think you wouldn't see mobility pattern changes, and on possibly a greater scale. So like, why not prepare for them? Why not create an atmosphere, an environment where people can actually move and everyone can move, not just the people who are most able to at that moment.
So, Kate, what's the science community saying about this shebang?
So I'm going to answer your question kind of in a roundabout way by complaining about...
I kind of expected that.
By complaining about Geostorm. So
what's that?
Geostorm was this movie that came out last year.
Yes.
And it's basically, it got a lot of hype. It was like, oh, Hollywood finally makes a climate change movie. And it's basically Gerard Butler, who was in like 300. He just shouts at the weather. That's the movie.
On a scale of that and Day After Tomorrow, which is worse?
So I want to complain about Day After Tomorrow, too. And like the problem I think a lot of scientists have with these movies is A, like they do not make any sense according to the laws of thermodynamics. But B, they kind of portray climate change as this thing that you shouldn't care about until it's a giant disaster that destroys the entire world. So in Day After Tomorrow, like for no reason, there's tornadoes that destroy LA. And then like, it's like, well, I guess LA's gone. And then the whole rest of the movie is just focused in New York.
Yeah, that's true. They were like, the rest of the country's dead.
Right? And, in Geostorm, it's like the entire world gets destroyed, basically. And I think that leads to an expectation that we shouldn't really have to care about climate change until, like, the Earth rises up and tries to kill us all. But that's not actually the thing that scares me the most about climate change. Like, there's a lot about climate change that's really scary to me. Sea level rise, increased heat waves, stronger hurricanes. Like, these are things that really scare me. But the thing that scares me the most is I know exactly what a column of water vapor does when you heat it up because I'm a physicist and I care about that. I don't know what people do when you heat them up. And so the thing that scares me the most is what we are going to do to each other. And so I think that is a very commonly held belief in the scientific community, that the impacts of climate change don't need to be the entire world burns down and we all die in order to be something that we really care about. And this is something that's so pervasive, that affects so many aspects of our society. It affects what we eat and how we grow that. It affects where we get our water. It affects our transportation systems. It affects where we live. And those are things that I think as physical scientists we know are really far above our pay grade. And then we have lived the Holocene, this past climate state that we've lived, most of our society has developed in, has been remarkably stable. So we haven't really had to think about climate change because we haven't really had to think about climate. And so that's kind of circling back around to the Green New Deal. That's where I actually think there is scientific support for thinking about climate change not as this isolated issue, because you can't. You can't care about climate change or the economy. You can't care about climate change or equity. If you care about equity, you have to care about climate change. If you care about jobs, you have to care about climate change. And I think that's something that the science does really support. I think
Can I just tell you, it's so lovely to hear another scientist say these things. I don't know how often you hear, doctors talk about equity as just an inevitable part of the conversation of solutions, but is this something that you more and more scientists are getting on board with, like intersectionality?
we do not know what that word means.
Just wondering, like, how far we had gone. Okay, not there.
Most
We're
people
not
don't.
there yet. We're not there yet.
They think they do, they don't.
Yeah. Things are connected. We have to solve all these problems together. So how popular is this thing? Are people into it? Like,
Yeah, people are really into it. But the thing is, people are into it. Politicians aren't always. But that's a lot of where we are, right? People poll
how is it
on different
polling?
things. It's numbered second issue among Iowa caucus voters, regularly polling within the top 5 issues for Democratic voters. I think the last numbers I saw were still above 50%, 60% on across the board, so on both sides of the aisle among voters. So people are
60% of Americans support a Green New Deal.
Yeah, the one. Yeah, I mean, a lot of America doesn't know what it is yet, but a lot of them do. But ones who do are about 60%.
But the press makes it seem like everyone hates it. What's up with that?
I mean, I think there's a lot of dynamics there. I think that there are. One is that I think we continue to see a split between what people want and what people in power say people want. And I think that that's part of it. The press is really attuned. And I don't say this to say anything negative about the press. I wanted to be a journalist for a long time. I think that they do incredibly valuable work. But I think part of the nature of journalism, at least the kind that covers climate, is they're very attuned to elites. They're very attuned to what very serious people say. And a lot of very serious people don't understand. It's not that they don't like the Green New Deal. They don't like the equity and environment connection. That they don't understand, and they think it's silly. A lot of them. So I think
we
that's
actually had
part
the
of
same
it.
problem when I was one of the leads of the original March for Science, and we had a whole equity and inclusion statement about how science actually could help solve problems and help other humans, and maybe everyone should be able to do science. People were like, how could that be part of the March for Science's platform? Just stick to science. And I was like, well, who's a scientist determines what science gets done and how it's used and all this stuff. So I've been there. It's not fun. It's not fun.
So that's part of it. I think the other part of it that we generally don't talk about, but I think is a tension that's there, is that this is largely a movement led by young people of color. Right? You have representatives.
Let's go to the evidence on that.
Oh, yeah. So this is from
Tell us about these lovely humans, Rhiana.
So this is from the MSNBC town hall on the Green New Deal, which was on the Chris Hayes shows. This is some of the panelists. So that's Damon Drummer on the end. He's my boss. He doesn't smile in photos for some reason. Everyone's like, yes, and Damon's like, why am I here? That's
He's
me.
He's the behind-the-scenes guy.
Yeah, that's me with my weave blown out. And that's obviously Representative Ocasio-Cortez. That's Heather McGhee. She used to be the president of Demos. Now is writing a book, MSNBC analyst, big supporter of the Green New Deal. And Shoykha Chakrabarti, who is AOC's chief of staff. And the executive director of Sunrise Movement is an Indian American woman. I think she's in her mid-20s maybe. The head of Justice Democrats is a Latina woman, also in mid-20s. And so I think there is an unspoken tension about who gets to decide the direction of this country, who gets to speak, and whose voices are taken seriously. So I think that's part of it.
I have to say, someone texted me this photo, and I like lost my shit. I was
Yeah.
like, these are the people writing it. It might actually include some of the issues that I care about.
Yeah.
Instead of just being like, technology will solve it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so, I mean, I think that that's part of it that we can't get around, which is that a lot of people don't take the Green New Deal seriously because they don't take the proponents of it seriously. I'm a 29-year-old black woman with a 70s shag weave. And a half-sleeve tattoo who rarely wears real pants unless under duress.
I did get a text this morning that was like, real pants, like suit, what do I have to do here? And she actually like told Twitter about this whole dilemma and told the internet that Dr. Kate Marvel wears real pants, and this was Kate's retort.
Clearly we define real pants differently. Kate came looking like a superhero. I came just like looking like I planned to go to Target on purpose instead of on accident, which is how I usually look. I look like I just dropped off my kids at school. I ain't got no kids. But you know, I mean, I might be a Rhodes Scholar, but people hear me talk and they don't hear gravitas. They don't imagine that I'm a person that would talk about that. So I think that's part of it. And I also just think that the Green New Deal is asking us to do a lot of things and a lot of thinking that we haven't done in a long time, right? It's not just like, let's connect equity to the environment. It's saying like, hey, climate is not just an environmental or technical issue. This is an issue of political economy. You will not tackle climate change unless you are tackling not only your economy, but the politics and the structures that support that economy. We're also saying like, hey, financialization, right? Big banks, big corps will not save us, right? It's about investing in the actual making of things. It's about, you know, putting people back to work. It's about saying we can still pay wages that are union wages.
So in your new consensus policy document explaining like why the Green New Deal is necessary, you describe the role of corporations as we're kind of assuming that if you have an orchestra and everyone's like playing a different instrument and each instrument is a corporation, that like, who needs a conductor? The companies are gonna figure it out.
Yes.
And like that's not actually how orchestras work.
No, it's not how
So the Green New
work.
Deal is to like coordinate everyone and like let's all do this together.
Yeah, so we're asking people, it's enough to ask people to make one big idea leap. We're asking people to make like 6, right? And when you add all that together, to a lot of people I respect and work with, that sounds like madness. It sounds to them like stupidity. It sounds to them like insanity. And so that's the way that they cover it. But I mean, that's not what it is. And I think there's a lot of logic there, and there's a lot of thought that goes into it and went into it. And so we'll see that play out over time. But I think right now we are shocking a lot of systems. I mean, at the very core, we're saying that like neoliberalism is not a paradigm that's gonna save us, serve us, or bring us forward, right? A lot of people's lives and livelihoods are based on them succeeding in a particular framework, in a particular paradigm. And this is asking them to not only share power, but to give up power, right? And it's asking us to think about a new future that is beautiful, but also way more collective, right? Way less atomized, way more invested in the health and well-being of one another. And so that's a lot of, I mean, when do you talk,
It's
when
a
does a
leap.
when does a Wall Street Journal talk about caring about your collective? So we shouldn't be that surprised that some folks are like, what?
So you wrote this, everything is 14 pages, right? So there's this great policy document that came out of New Consensus think tank that Rhiana co-authored. And I just wanted to share with you this one few sentences on the vision, because I read this and I was like, that sounds really exciting, let's do that. What a nation can do and can build is ultimately limited only by the size, skills, and creative energies of its population, the capacities of its companies, organizations, and governments, and its available natural resources. On all of these counts, people, organizations, and resources, America is unsurpassed among nations. We have everything we need to achieve a just, prosperous, and sustainable economy, the kind the New Deal brought to some Americans and that the Green New Deal will bring for all Americans. All we await is a catalyst. So this is your poetry.
Dang, we did write that. That's cute.
So I was like, yep, I'm in. Okay, how do we, but the like, how do we get there part is super hard, right?
Yes.
So Kate, what do we not yet know on the science side that like we should know to be able to really like put all these pieces together and put it off? Are there some gaps or blanks that we still need to be filling in?
So I think there's kind of two big gaps in the science that we're working on. So one is the fact that we don't know exactly how hot it's going to get. And a lot of that is because we don't know what people are going to do. But even if you removed all of that uncertainty associated with emissions trajectories, even if you sort of had a hypothetical scenario where we just double carbon dioxide and we wait for the climate to reach a new equilibrium, we still don't have a really good handle on how much warming would result from that. And that's because there are uncertainties in the physical climate system that we still haven't really nailed down. And that's because climate change changes things. So you warm up the temperature, the climate changes, and those climate changes can then feed back onto the temperature, and it can speed up or slow down the warming. An example is ice melt. You melt the polar ice caps. They used to be really nice and reflective, and now they're not anymore. And so that is an example of, and I think the worst terminology scientists have ever come up with, a positive feedback. Because like normal people hear positive feedback and they're like, I'm doing great. And we mean we're all gonna die.
One of my favorite things is like the table between like what scientists say, like what people hear, and like maybe say it this way instead.
Yeah. So I definitely like try to say like vicious cycle. That's kind of where my personal research is mostly focused. I think something else that we don't know, and to some degree can't know, is information on a really, really targeted local scale. A lot of people want to know, hey, if I buy a house in the Rockaways, when do I have to sell it? Or
not if.
Yeah.
But when?
Don't buy a house in the Rockaways.
Or really Florida.
Florida.
Yeah.
People want to know, like, when do we have to sell Florida? And there will always be an element of uncertainty there. There will always, we are never going to be able to tell you exactly what the weather is on January 25th, 2026 at 9 a.m. There's always going to be that sort of randomness in the system. I think we can get better at improving projections for local areas. So we've moved, and the years climate science has kind of been a thing. We've moved from saying we think maybe carbon dioxide will warm up the planet to it'll warm up the planet. Here's what it means for various things like temperature and rainfall and heat waves and hurricanes. And I think now we can move farther into here's what it means for the regions that you care about. But there's always going to be that sort of intrinsic randomness in the system.
Tell us about clouds. What role do clouds play in all that? She gave a great TED talk about this, but we'll give you like the Cliff's Notes version.
So I actually really hate clouds because I hate weather. Like I just want to live in California and have like 70-degree days all day. But it turns out that the number one reason we don't know how hot it's going to get is because we don't know what clouds are going to do. And we've for a long time, so I've had to care about clouds, the sacrifices I make for this movement.
We can have a whole other panel on that.
I know, right? So for a long time, that was, I think, kind of the last hope that maybe nature would save us. So, if warming up the planet made more clouds, then that would kind of be bad because it would be really gloomy and it would block a lot of sunlight, but maybe climate change wouldn't happen as fast and we would all be okay. And so that was something that was probably wrong, but not insane to believe. And now, with more and more evidence that we're accumulating, we're kind of realizing, like, no, that's just wrong. That's just not going to happen. And in fact, everything we learn about clouds is convincing us that they're actually going in the other direction. They're going to make things worse.
So clouds are not going to save us.
No, I think it's up to us, guys.
We have to save ourselves.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can we also just take a moment to I like to, whenever I hear about the way humans are reacting or what we do with climate change, we are just like the biggest fuck boys. We're just like trash. We destroy everything and we're like, maybe maybe Earth will just fix it. Like, it's fine. Like, no. And it feels like we just like created a mess. I always tell people, I'm like, climate change is like ghosting the planet. Like, we like made a big mess. Like, now we see it and we're like, oh, maybe if we just like walked away and like we'll just never speak to one another again and it's fine. You'll heal, I'll move on, But now we're figuring out that Earth is way more vindictive. She's like, oh, you're getting out. I'm kicking you out.
How has climate change affected the way that each of you plan your own futures? Because you know so much.
So I'll start because I won't have a very smart answer to this. It doesn't, but for like, I'm not a nihilist, right? But I also just think that like, I've never been a particularly hopeful person. And I always felt like that was really bad, right? Because people, especially like when Barack Obama was around, everyone's like, I have so much hope. And I was like, what does that feel like? I don't know what that emotion, is it like when you eat ice cream? And I didn't really know, but that has meant that, and it's turned to be like kind of a useful thing now, because what it's meant is that I've never needed hope to do the work that I do. And so right now it doesn't change my life because I just feel like this is a fight that has to be fought. I can't control whether we win it or not, but I have to fight it. And so to fight it, I'm just gonna, and I need certain things in my life to fight it. I need my husband, I need my dog, I need Flamin' Hot Cheetos, I need, and so.
Let's get those Cheetos plants carbon neutral ASAP. Keep them coming.
Please do. Focus on the extra hot ones. And so I'd like, because I know that this will be a fight, and even if it's not this fight, it'll be a different one. I just have to structure my life to be ready to be in those battles, and so that's sort of the ways that I structure my life. So I can't say, also like, again, I said it before, but I'm a Black woman, so like my life was never, and I'm a Black woman from Inglewood, Chicago, so like I'm from the hood. So nothing in my life was ever guaranteed. I didn't even expect to get this much power in my life. And so the idea that like now climate change would make me very fearful in a way that like I'm already afraid when I drive cross country. I'm afraid when I see a cop. I'm afraid when my husband is away from me, right? Navigating this world as a Black man, like I'm afraid that I raised a bad dog, right? Like I'm afraid of lots of things. And so like, I don't know, this has never been my first existential crisis. Shout out to Mary. And so I guess like, it feels like I've lived with this uncertainty that the life and the people that I love that there were systems that could destroy them or destroy us. Oh God, this is getting so dark.
And so real.
Yeah, but I can't say that it's like something that really changes the trajectory of my life, because I hope that my life will always be about caring, building a capacity and systems that care more about people. And so, I just keep doing it. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Sorry.
Don't apologize for that. Kate, how how has your life plan changed because of everything you know about what's happening to our planet, if at all? How do you factor all this in?
I mean, I feel like people come up to me at parties, and when they find out what I do, they're like, "You must be so depressed," and I'm like, "That's rude." And I feel like people are sometimes disappointed that I'm not more depressed. I think there should definitely...
People see me smile and they're like, "You have so much hope." I'm like, this is not hope. This is like happiness, because being alive is pretty cool at this moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I totally agree that I don't think hope is required. And that seems really sort of, that's a horrible thing to hear. But when you think about, I don't know, like every story ever written, can you imagine like if Lord of the Rings were like, well, that seems like a really hard thing, like let's just give up right now. And like, it would have saved a lot of pages. But, the hero's journey is not the hero demanding assurance that everything's gonna be okay in the end, And there's a reason that this is a story that really resonates with all sorts of groups of people throughout all sorts of different time periods of history. Like these stories are really meaningful to us, I think, because we know that if you know what the right thing to do is, it doesn't really make sense to demand proof that there's going to be a happy ending before you start out on the path. So that's the way I think about it.
But have you do you have a bunker in New Zealand with all the tech billionaires? Like, are you stockpiling gold or?
Can you imagine having to spend eternity with Peter Thiel? Like,
no,
really?
No, take me out.
I do feel like all these dudes were like, it's no problem, we'll just go to Mars. I'm like, you won't even go to the Bronx, Like, you're not gonna go to Mars.
Okay.
Oh, speaking of that, yeah, if there's an apocalypse, I'm out. Like, I'm not built for the apocalypse, just so you know.
Noted.
So that's also why I'm like, well, if
Better
it all
fix
falls,
this.
I'm out. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna make it, so.
I had a question on here that I know all three of us get asked a lot about hope. So my question for you was, are you sick of getting asked about your source of hope?
No one asked me that.
Really?
No.
I get asked this all the time.
No, I think it's
How do you stay hopeful and positive?
Oh, I guess maybe people kind of ask me that. Honestly,
You're not sick of it yet.
I don't get asked it that often. Yeah. I guess I just give off a vibe that I'm not very hopeful. So people are like, fuck that question. She's going to be like, what is hope? Yeah, but I mean, for me, the source is honestly like this work has made me probably more than any other area that I've worked on. It's made me gentler. It's also made me more hopeful. Wow. I know, it sounds very sweet. I guess it is.
It's okay to be sweet every once in a while.
Well, it has, because mostly what gives me hope is seeing how hard people are fighting, right? And it's easy, especially if you look at politicians, because a lot of them are not fighting about climate change at all. But when I look at the school strikes, when I see Greta Thunberg telling journalists to their face, I don't need hope, just I need action. Please go. And I'm like, yes, Greta. But I was telling one of the things that we do is try to figure out how this will happen, which means that we have to bring lots of experts from lots of areas together. And often they are not in these formations together ever. And I have seen people that had direct beef with one another stay in the room because they're like, this is what we have to do.
We have to figure it out.
We have to figure it out. We don't have many more exits. And so, that gives me hope, not because these people are best friends now, but because I feel like there is an amount of people just really throwing down and being like, listen, we're in this, we're gonna have to try to figure it out in a way that I haven't experienced before. And that brings me a lot of hope.
So I'm gonna ask one more question to Kate, and then we'll turn it over to all of you. And Kate, my question is around this sort of trajectory from solving climate change to mitigating climate change to adapting to climate change. So how do you think about that as a spectrum, and kind of maybe where are we on there? Like, how much emphasis should we be putting on these different sort of frameworks?
I mean, I think it's gonna have to be all three. You know, I think we are not going to prevent climate change because we haven't prevented climate change. You know, we have detected scientifically and like very, very rigorously attributed changes in a whole bunch of different things. We are changing rainfall patterns. We are, you know, increasing the incidence of heat waves. Hurricane Harvey, which dumped so much water on Houston. Because hot air holds more water vapor, you know, there is more water in a warmer world to fall as rain. And so Hurricane Harvey would not have been that intense had it not been for climate change. There is a signal of climate change, of human activities in the wildfires in California. And so I think, you know, saying let's prevent climate change, like that ship has sailed. We can't do that. You know, but does that mean we throw up our hands and we say, well, you know, we missed that target, so, you know, everybody just have a party while the world burns? Like, I don't think that's a good idea either. Because, you know, a 1.5 degree world, and these are Celsius again, sorry, that's what the IPCC uses. A 1.5 degree world is better than the world we have right now. Or, sorry, a 1.5 degree world is better than a 2-degree world. A 2-degree world is better than a 3-degree world. A 3-degree world is better than a 4-degree world. And so
I have to remind myself this every day, like every 10th of a degree like really matters to like the quality of life that's possible for this planet, and to like to Rhiana's point earlier, and to who's bearing the brunt of that, right? Like coastal communities that can't afford to move, who are getting hit by these storms and sea level rise.
yeah, so I think we have to accept that climate change is already here. I think we have to accept that there's more warming baked in the system. But I think at the same time, we can't use adaptation as an excuse to not mitigate. You know, we cannot say, well, we'll just build a seawall, because Miami's on limestone. Limestone's porous. You cannot build a seawall around Miami. That will protect Miami.
There are literally like already octopuses coming up through the gutters.
Yeah.
The water is coming up from underneath Miami. Marine biologist fun fact for you. Yeah, it's wild. Yeah.
Oh no. Oh no.
So yeah, I mean, I think like, you know, I would defer. There are a lot of people who think really deeply about what the right mix of these things should be. But I think, you know, saying, oh, we can put all of our eggs in one basket is just not smart.
Also, we can't hold back the sea.
No.
We just can't. Okay, so where is the microphone? There's one here. All right.
Hi,
You
guys.
get to ask a question in the form of a question without a preamble, like the resolution, by the way.
Totally. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on a Saturday. This has been really informative, I think, for everyone. I was encouraged to hear you guys speaking about frontline vulnerable communities. And those are also predominantly those from countries that are still developing their industrial capacity, like India, Indonesia, Brazil, and so forth. How does the question of providing reparations to those countries and allowing them greater regulatory wiggle room around emissions and combustible energy factor into the Green New Deal? Granted, we need to take the lead here, but our access to renewables and our existing infrastructure allows us, you know, more liberty there. But these developing countries don't have the same sort of capacity. So how does that factor into the conversation in terms of a global mindset?
So the Green New Deal is just for America.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's domestically focused, although there is actually one of the projects in there is about international exchange and working together. So the questions that you brought up are all super valid. I can't speak for the Green New Deal because we're still figuring out the policy, but I think there is definitely talk about how we're gonna handle it, not just in terms of developing tech and exporting tech, but aid in terms of whatever global agreements come together. How do we allow for developing countries to develop capacity? How do we allow them to adapt? And also, in some instances, lots of instances, how do we allow them to have a bigger say, right? In the global and whatever we decide to do globally, like the Marshall Islands, right, help really push forward the Paris Agreement in part because they were so impacted. And we see Mozambique, right? What happened there, that they didn't do that. That was us, right? We contributed those emissions. And so I think something that I would personally like to see, although we'll see if it bears out, is in thinking through some of those things, how do we actually allow nations that are most vulnerable, that are developing, to be setting more of the rules? Now, the Green New Deal doesn't cover, right, international agreements right now, obviously, but it is a question that we think about a lot, and are thinking about ways that whatever is in the Green New Deal can both fit those goals, connect to the industrial policy framing of the Green New Deal, and anything that does not fit in there, we can still push along through other paths and other legislation.
So Kate, you mentioned this earlier when we were chatting about, like, so where are we on the international stage as far as nations committing, and like if people follow through in their Paris Agreement commitments to emissions reductions, how far does that get us?
The Paris commitments are to keep the planet below roughly 3 degrees Celsius.
So we're still blowing through all the, like, everything's going to be fine numbers, even if countries actually do what they've committed to.
Under Paris, yes.
So one of the things that, like, I'll call it hope for lack of a better word, one of the things that gave me hope this year was seeing the reaction to the student strike. So 1.5 million students around the world striking, and the next day the Secretary General of the UN was like, emergency meeting, we need to get below 3. So stay tuned for that in September. Where is the microphone now, and can we get one up front here?
Hello. Hi. My question is specifically about carbon capture technologies, and I guess what you've heard, or if there's a lot of buzz in the scientific or policy worlds about, I mean, there's technologies that are being developed right now that can capture carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and convert it into things ranging from strengthening concrete to, I know one team is working on capturing carbon dioxide and converting it into carbon nanotubes, which can be used in construction and a variety of other uses. I know this is a super nitpicky kind of specific question.
Carbon capture is actually a big question.
Yeah.
Like the specific technologies aside, like what's up with carbon capture?
And yeah, I guess
Can we
like
just, like, take
how
it out of
much
the
of a
atmosphere?
role do you
Yeah.
anticipate it playing in the Green New Deal or other deals going forward aimed at alleviating the harms? Okay.
Thank you. And can you pass your mic up front here? Oh, you got it.
So I'll say for the Green New Deal, carbon capture is a big question, and our main focus on it is how do you, if carbon capture, is going to play a role, how do you do that in a way that's equitable, right? Because there's a lot of anxiety, particularly in frontline communities, that carbon capture is just a way to allow fossil fuel companies to keep emitting, right, and capture it, right? But of course, carbon capture on industrial facilities, from what I understand, right, someone has told, one very reputable person has told me it captures all of the co-pollutants, but frontline communities don't seem to think that is the case, right? And still there's waste byproducts and all of those other things. And so for us, the main question, besides like, does it fit in, does it have a role, is how do you do it, when, and how do you do it in a way that's equitable and doesn't just allow continued pollution in certain communities.
Kate,
yeah,
where's
so
the science on this? What are people saying?
That's not really my field. It's my job to tell you what carbon dioxide does once you put it in the atmosphere, but how you put it there or take it out, that's kind of, a separate field from mine. When people talk about geoengineering, sometimes people are talking about, actually blocking sunlight in order to lower the temperature, and we can talk a lot about that later if people have questions. But sometimes people are talking about actually removing carbon from the atmosphere as a form of geoengineering. And I think removing carbon from the atmosphere from a scientific perspective is, if you can figure out what to do with it, if you can figure out where to store it in the long term, that is a far more safe proposition than, for example, blocking the sun to make it colder.
So I'm a super, super big fan of photosynthesis, and I feel like that doesn't get enough love, right? Like, could we have just like some more plants? Could we bring some wetlands back? Can we plant some
Right.
mangroves? As a coastal person,
Right.
I know that these coastal ecosystems absorb 5 times more carbon than forests on land. So I think there's like a role for nature conservation, and it doesn't have to be all tech.
Right.
So I just wanted to, interject my
Right.
little opinion on that.
No, that's helpful.
And that's part of the Green New Deal's
The-
projects.
yep.
Like one of their projects is like maybe we could restore the ecosystems that could suck the carbon out of the atmosphere by doing photosynthesis, because plants are really good at that. Okay. So a question in the front right here, and then we have a time for 1 or 2 more.
Tomorrow marks 55 years since the death of Rachel Carson, who, awakened the environmental conscience with Silent Spring. And she never lived to see the impact. She never lived to see it reach policy, the founding of the EPA, and pop culture and all of that. And I wonder, where is the Rachel Carson of today? Is it that we just don't have someone this good at the intersection of science and storytelling? Is it that we live in a kind of polyphonous media ecosystem where it's hard for any one voice to command this much attention? Or has the nature of listening changed? Like, what is happening, and what role does storytelling play in commanding not just attention, but action and empathic investment in this?
I love that question.
Yeah. Well, as far David Wallace Wells, I think The Uninhabitable Earth, has been getting a lot of shine. And I mean, I think that so far, and just like seeing the reaction to that and reading some of the book myself, I still haven't finished it. Don't tell anybody. I mean, I guess I just told all y'all, so now everybody knows. So whatever. I think that seems to be a powerful story, and the things that he's saying, whether it's that like we have had 5 extinctions, actually, et cetera, are really powerful. But I think from a policy standpoint, stories are incredibly important. Data will get you in the room, right, with policymakers. Stories are what make them change their minds. Particularly stories of people in their districts and their constituents. And so a lot of, not what we do at New Consensus necessarily, but I know that a lot of work that's being done around the Green New Deal and around sort of this like forming new, I guess, next iteration of climate movement work is trying to figure out how do you tell those stories, particularly now that frontline communities are being elevated. How do you actually tell those stories about the harms that are happening right now, about the toll, about what it actually feels like to be a farmer in Nebraska who's lost their farm, right, to flooding? What does it actually feel like to have lived through Hurricane Harvey, right? And all of these things. What does it mean to like lose a baby to, mountaintop removal and the emissions that causes, right? And so it's really crucial, and it's something that I hope is going to be happening more. Particularly as the Green New Deal pushes forward, because I don't see how we will get to where we need to be in terms of building power, both politically and popularly, without stories and without really powerful stories.
I think a lot of scientists are turning to fiction, Dr. Marvel among them. And I think for a lot of people, the most powerful part of Silent Spring was Rachel Carson's introduction, the preamble, describing the scenario where you have a spring without birdsong. And so I think there are more and more people playing with like that piece of it. The science books with varying degrees of poetry have been written, but that sort of like introduction piece is being iterated on for this new era, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you asked sort of where are the Rachel Carsons of today, where are the sort of brilliant communicators who are really changing the narrative. Like, there they are, guys, right there. And
Have you read Kate Marvel's Scientific American blog? There's some really good stuff there. So where do we have a microphone, and can it not always go to white dudes?
Well,
Sorry, I'm still a white person.
That's okay. We're mixing it up a tiny bit here. I mean, it's whatever. We'll go. We'll just not deal with the demographics of
Brooklyn.
Of Brooklyn right now. Yeah.
So strategically for getting the Green New Deal through, I'm sorry, how much do you foresee it's going to be a beautiful bipartisan mechanism, and how much is it do you think it's actually just going to be kind of shoving it through the way the ACA happened, and which elites can we really be focusing on? Sorry, it's multi-part.
That's a really good question. I mean, the bipartisanship question is difficult for me because I think what we do, the Green Deal, is nonpartisan. The Green Deal, the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is nonpartisan. Climate change is nonpartisan. Climate change doesn't care if you're Democrat or Republican. It just literally doesn't. Now, if you're rich or poor, you have some differences. But I think so. Bipartisanship. I mean, I think I'm the wrong person to ask, right? Like, we need to be asking, if we want a beautiful bipartisanship, you need to be talking to the GOP, right? Like, one party is moving on climate, one party isn't. One party is largely, I mean, they both take oil money, right? And fossil fuel money, but let's be honest, the GOP has also been intransigent because they are heavily funded by fossil fuel industries, right? And so in my ideal scenario, it would be a lovely bipartisan effort. Is ExxonMobil gonna let that happen? I don't know. Is Mitch McConnell gonna let that happen? By all signs, absolutely not. And so I think that, like, and we can't wait. The issue is that we cannot wait until it's a beautiful bipartisan effort. We cannot wait. And so I think ideally it's not shoved, but if it has to be shoved, it has to be shoved. And new consensus, we're C3, so we don't do the shoving, but somebody's gonna shove. And so I think the elites that can be moved the most are, I think, in my estimation, I think there are Dems in safe blue seats. It's one thing if you're in a purple district, but a lot of people who haven't come out are in safe blue districts. That district is Democratic. There's really no reason. So I think those are people to push on. I think actually Republicans in areas that are really at the most risk of climate change. So I think Senator Murkowski has actually been she's the one from Alaska, right? Yeah, so she has come out not for a Green New Deal, but definitely is concerned about climate. We should do something. And so I think there are Republican reps and senators in these areas that will be facing impacts, who, like, if you could get their communities organized and saying, hey, this is climate change, we want you to do something, and it's coming from their constituents, you could see some movement.
I think there's a real opportunity in that the framing includes a lot about agriculture.
And a lot about jobs.
Yeah, and rural communities, agricultural communities are struggling right now. I mean, the whole food system and the way we don't value food and everything's supposed to be super cheap, and the way subsidies are done and family farming is falling apart, and the average age of a farmer in America is in like their late 60s, right? So there's a real opportunity to think about, like, how does this element of reforming agriculture in regenerative farming and in supporting small farms to draw down carbon and provide jobs can be a really big part of the solution in rural areas. So I'm like wistfully hoping that brings some more folks on board. Have you seen any evidence of that?
Not
yet? Okay.
Not yet, but I do definitely have seen us gain traction on the ground in some communities that are dominated by fossil fuel industries because there is a discussion of jobs and because there's a recognition that green jobs are not of the same quality as the union jobs that they could displace, and that there is a real investment and discussion of job quality in the Green New Deal, which I think is pretty clear. So I think that's helpful. And then, I mean, I don't know how much these elites will change the voting, although I think it could, is putting pressure on particularly companies that want to seem liberal but also want to get money from oil companies. So like Amazon, right, is heavily heavily advertising and trying to get fossil fuel companies to use AWS, their like cloud internet software. Amazon is like one of the richest companies in the world. Why? Why do you need to do that? Is your whole business model gonna fall apart? No? So why are you investing in this? And so putting some of that pressure so that they're, because the fact is, like, these are donors, right? You also, in our political system, unfortunately, it's not just politicians, you have to pressure their donors. And so pressuring donors about moving on climate change or not supporting blocking climate legislation, I think that's actually a bit of a tougher scale because they're not as permeable to public input. They don't necessarily have to care. But I do think that like any effort to build power has to not just be on people, politicians, but also on the donor class.
So there's a lot to talk about. We're going to take one last question over here, and then we'll continue this along. Oh, great. You have the mic.
Hi, thank you so much. So, as you mentioned, since this is a movement that really started with younger people, especially high school age, I was wondering, how does the Green New Deal encourage students and in public school to restore their local ecosystems, much like the Billion Oyster Project does, if you know about it?
Does anyone, as a board member of the Billion Oyster Project, I'd be happy to give everyone the 2-sentence rundown before we answer that question. So there's a public high school on Governor's Island here in New York Harbor called the Harbor School, and they do vocational training in addition to high school degrees. You can get like a special certification in aquaculture or boat driving or marine biology or all these sort of awesome things, and their goal is the Billion Oyster Project is the nonprofit associated with it, and they're trying to replant 1 billion oysters in New York Harbor by 2035 and involve 1 million students in the process. So oysters used to be like trillions in New York Harbor, so that's a big part of it. And they form reefs large enough to be a part of storm protection when they're restored. So that's the Billion Oyster Project. Can we get more such ecological restoration happening?
Yeah, that's definitely that also sounds like a great project.
It's very cool.
So yeah, I mean, so this is a tough thing. So the Green New Deal is a federal policy, right? And federal policy mostly enacts regulations, sets up programs, creates funding, et cetera, et cetera. And so directly funding that sort of stuff at the local level is tough. Now, the nice thing about the Green New Deal is actually there's a big focus on doing a lot of these projects from local standpoints and investing in community efforts. And so I think that's where it'll come from. And so I think there's definitely a space there for that, particularly if the ecological restoration piece the policy does include some funding or some mandates for local programming, that sort of thing could be supportive. But would it be written directly into the Green New Deal? Likely not, just because of the way also that education is structured, and very like state and local control. But would there be buckets of funding for things like this? I think so, or I hope so.
So I just want to let you all know that each of these experts has recommended 3 books for you to read if you want to like be inspired to think more about the challenges and the solutions. And they're available for purchase in the back, but I just want to let you know what they are. Kate recommended Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower. Borges' Aleph and Other Stories, and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So she's clearly like, well, we're going the fiction route because we need to envision a whole other world. And Rhiana recommended Makers and Takers by Rana Foroohar, The Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warming by David Wallace Wells, which was mentioned, and Killing the Black Body, Race, Reproduction, and the Meaning of Liberty by Dorothy E. Roberts. So I hope that you'll all take this as an opportunity to continue to dive in now that you've heard from these experts and think about how we can all build community around solutions. I really think that's the most important thing. And I guess I want to end by just reading you the end of the Green New Deal resolution, which says,
The new hotness.
so hot right now.
So hot.
everyone's like, there's going to be a spike in like the Googling of Green New Deal resolution as you all go home to read it tonight before bed. Providing all people of the United States with high quality health care, affordable, safe, and adequate housing, economic security, and clean water, clean air, healthy and affordable food, and access to nature. Because it's all connected. We actually can have it all at the same time if we do it right. So let's do it right.
Yeah.
So there's drinks. There's going to be a bonfire in the garden. Hang out, talk to each other, talk to us, and this is the beginning.
Yeah, and if anyone was wondering why I recommended killing the black body, which clearly doesn't have a ton to do with climate change, so it's a really good exploration of structural intersectionality. So Dorothy Roberts is a scholar, I think she's still at Northwestern, but she writes a lot about how essentially systems intersect to create certain outcomes. So this is about reproduction and the ways that systems influence the ways that poor black women are allowed to reproduce and how that is, come through history.
It's all connected.
It is.
It's all connected. Thank you both so much for being here with us.